If you feel it in your gut, don't say but. How to scope out and grow leaders in your church organization. Bob Bill has often said when he is speaking that every organization eventually reflects the leadership that is leading that organization. And I think he's hit the nail on the head exactly. I was reading a book sometime back that I just found some very interesting guidelines in it that I wanted to share today, or share off of. Larry Osborne has some great ideas in his Sticky Church book about developing groups and small group leaders, and he's a proponent of specifically developing a sermon-based small group system. I'll let you read that sometime. I'll put a link down in the description here for that if you'd like to try to find that. But I want to talk about finding and developing leaders today. What do you need to do to scope them out? How do you find them? How do you develop them? What kind of leaders do you need at varying places within the church? There's nothing much worse than just reaching out and having a beck and call for volunteers. Anybody who wants to do this, we just need somebody to fill the space. And when churches get in that mode of just taking any volunteer, the quality of those who are volunteering, the quality of those who are leading in those various ministries will rapidly come down. And so we need to be thinking in terms of what do we need to be looking for and how do we develop leaders into the future. Otherwise, it's going to be a chaotic issue for us for a long time and potentially cause a lot more grief than anything in the long term, trying to manage that, whoever's in charge of that, whether it be the pastor in a smaller or mid-sized church, or whether it be someone who's assigned that as a leadership position. So what do we look for? I want to propose today that we look for two specific things when you're looking for leaders. When you've got your eyeballs out there and you're trying to be aware, be alert to those in your congregation, look for these two things. Look first for spiritual warmth and for relational warmth. Spiritual warmth and relational warmth. Now let's look at this just a moment and talk about it. Now, understanding spiritual warmth is very important. Now, this is different than spiritual maturity. Spiritual warmth and spiritual maturity are oftentimes mixed up by individuals who are looking at leadership. Spiritual warmth is a warming up where people understand they want to be around you to talk about the things of God. There's a vibrancy in the relationship with Jesus Christ, and people pick up on that. People know that. Spiritual maturity comes because of following Christ for an extended period of time, for longevity, having the sense to have walked the path, both over the mountaintops and through the valleys. Now, we can look at the Apostle Paul and see how he designated leaders, I guess you could say, in the early churches. He would go into an area, he would plant a church, and he typically left that church in less than 3 years. He didn't stay there for a long time. Many church planters today have the mindset that they're going to go and they're going to plant that church and not go anywhere else. I'm going to stay right here. I'm going to plant the church and I'm going to be the longtime pastor. But Paul never had that mentality. He was very catalytic in his planting. And when he would leave that new congregation, there wouldn't have been time for spiritual maturity. They wouldn't have had time to have people who were in the faith for many, many years. So he would leave those in charge as he left who were basically spiritually warm, those who would attract others to come and would come to know faith. They would know enough to be enthusiastic about the faith and to share what they knew. They sprung up in enthusiasm because of the truth that they already had. They didn't have to have all truth, but they had truth. Then you see Paul would go back to those churches sometimes many years later, and when he would go back, then he would appoint spiritual leaders. He would appoint elders, other leaders who would then lead with the administration and the leadership in the church. He didn't appoint those new spiritual individuals to those key leadership positions in the church. He knew they required spiritual maturity. So oftentimes in churches, we set the bar so high. We say we don't want someone who is leading a small group, leading a class, leading whatever it is. And we set the bar so high to say, well, they need to be spiritually mature. They need to have been a Christian for X number of years, et cetera, et cetera. And so what happens is when the bar is set so high, we end up frustrating ourselves to an extreme amount when we look at it that way. We need spiritual warmth. And someone who has spiritual warmth can help be a guide, can help lead people down that path, which is very, very important. But they don't necessarily have a solid grasp on all the scriptural issues, all of the areas of debate, all the gray areas, all of that kind of thing. So we see that those early leaders had spiritual warmth, just not maybe spiritual depth yet at that point. So most of the time, it's the case, if we insist on spiritual maturity and we're not looking for spiritual warmth, what ends up happening is we've raised the bar so high, it scares away those who would be willing to potentially lead, but they know they're not going to make that spiritual maturity bar. Now, the second area that you want to look for is not just spiritual warmth, but relational warmth. Relational warmth cannot be understated. It is so important because someone who is low in social skills, low in emotional intelligence is going to do nothing but ultimately drive people away. They're not going to be able to draw people to them. You can use this test for the most part when you're looking for this kind of person to lead a group or lead a particular ministry. Think of it this way. Ask yourself a couple of simple questions. One, is that person likable? Is that person like, are other people drawn to that person? And then the other question you might ask, is that someone that I would want to spend a long evening with over dinner and just sitting around having a conversation? Is that someone who would engage me, someone who I would feel comfortable with? Now, see, that may be someone who has that relational warmth and may be very open to being that kind of a leader that you may ultimately need. Because let's just face it, the reality is those who don't know how to play well are eventually going to empty the sandbox. So you can't underestimate the importance of someone who has relational warmth. Now, there was a life slogan that we taught our kids and we used around our house for many, many years. And it's really simple, but it's kind of along this idea that we would oftentimes say, and that is, if you feel it in your gut, don't say but. Meaning sometimes we have this sense, we have an inward feeling about something, and we don't move forward with that feeling, especially within the church. Oftentimes we see someone isn't relationally warm. We see someone doesn't have the kind of spiritual warmth that they really need to lead a group or to lead a ministry, but they say they're willing, they're open and available. And sometimes we rank that to be much higher. And what ends up happening is it ends up being a pretty big catastrophe at that problem. Most Christian leaders really do recoil at the fact that they need to say no sometimes to individual leaders. They need to say, you're just not a right fit for this. And people oftentimes won't understand if there's an open slot. It's kind of like the old committee system. Some of your churches may still have a committee system, but if they have a committee set up, there's this many lines identified in the bylaws. We have 5 slots, we have 8 slots, we have 9 slots, whatever it is. And every year when it comes nominating time, we look and say, okay, we've got to get people to fill those slots. And oftentimes we're not looking for people who have a passion for that particular thing or a passion for that ministry. We're not even looking for any of that. We're only looking for somebody who can say willingly, I'll put my name on the slot. And those are not the kind of leaders that you want to have long term. Now, let me tell you a little bit more about who to avoid. There's 2 things that you need to look at. You're looking for spiritual warmth and relational warmth. But 2 things that you need to avoid, and these are really just as important as the other 2 traits that are basically for a bad leader. The first is the hyper spiritual God talkers. Now, we've all seen these. We know exactly who this is. Sadly, you may have a name or 2 for some of these, those who are spiritual God talkers. They're always peppering their speech with God talk, talking about all of the things that they spiritually can communicate about, peppering in scripture verses and all those kind of things all the time, and always making sure everybody knows that they're one of the most spiritual in the room. And when you have someone who is a hyper spiritual God talker, that's a real red flag. You want to put a caution up for that, because that individual, if they become a group leader or become the leader of some small ministry where people are gathered, what happens is they become very prominent. They are always talking. They're always speaking out because they have something to prove. They're a God talker, and they want to make sure people know that about them. And what often happens is those, especially who are a little less timid in a group setting with multiple people, they end up kind of sitting back. They don't want to jump in. They realize very quickly they're not as spiritual as that person. They can't be as spiritual as that person, and they have all these struggles and hurts and pains, and it's just agony for them. And this person does not give the impression that they're going to be a listener, that they're going to hear. And so that kind of hyper spiritual leader oftentimes squashes out any kind of authenticity, any kind of trust in that group. That group cannot feel like they can be honest with that kind of a leader. Now, the second kind of person to avoid is the person who is a single issue crusader. And that's the kind of leader that will quickly destroy a group as well. Now, here's the reason why. A single issue crusader, and let me just stop and say, it doesn't really matter what the issue is. The issue can be anything, okay? It can be somebody who is very much on a pro-life tangent. It could be somebody who's on an end times tangent. It could be somebody, it doesn't matter. Whatever the issue is, it doesn't matter. If they're a single issue crusader, what ends up happening is they end up pushing people away, because initially they have a desire to just make sure people know that this is an important topic, and they talk about it a lot because it is their most important issue, that single issue. In fact, I love the way C.S. Lewis puts it. Let me read you this quote from C.S. Lewis. He says, it says, "The progression of a crusader is predictable. What starts out to be an important part of their devotion to Christ soon becomes the most important part of their devotion to Christ. Then, before long, it's likely to become even more important than their devotion to Christ." Now, that's a scary thing, but you need to understand it's almost impossible for someone who has a single issue mentality, that single issue crusader, to be open to listening to other people. So if they're in charge of a small ministry or a small group, they're going to have a hard time giving legitimacy to other opinions, other thoughts, any of those gray areas where people struggle when they're having just a spiritual toil inside of them. This person is not going to be very receptive to listening to them, especially in the case of the area of crusade, that issue. They're going to be, they're stomping in, they're digging in on what that is for them, and they're not going to be very receptive to others. So it's going to be very hard for them to appropriately lead that kind of a group. And what's going to happen is somebody who is a single issue crusader will drive people away from your group, drive people away from your ministry. And those folks potentially, and very likely, to be honest, are not going to return. They're not going to look for another option. They're not going to look for other opportunities, because that's going to leave a really bad taste in their mouth. Just a bad thing at that point. So just remember what to look for: spiritual warmth and relational warmth. And two things to avoid is hyper spiritual God talkers and single issue crusaders. Now, whatever your system of developing and training leaders, think about those things as you're putting people into the pipeline to develop the leadership within your church. Don't take chances. If your gut feels it, remember what I said the life slogan was: if you feel it in your gut, Don't say but.